Okay. Erev Tov, everyone.
Erev Tov, Rabbi.
It's great to have you all here tonight. It's so good to be here. Okay, for another class. I'm getting already people tapping before even clapping before we started. So what I would like to do tonight is to speak about an interesting concept. The concept of Tum'ah and Tahara. In this week's Parashat, Tazria-Disease as well. Sefer Vayikra, in general, has a lot of these words of Tum'ah and Tahara. Now, what is exactly Tum'ah and Tahara? What is this concept all about? So, if you look at the English translation, many times it's going to be purity and impurity, clean and unclean, which is not really the right translation for it. There's no English word to translate the status of someone being tahor or someone being tameh. So tonight what we'll try to do is, and we'll have these copies, we'll try to understand what is Tum'ah and Tahara exactly. So the questions, confronted with this bewildering array of foreign concepts, the natural tendency is to shut down, to conclude that these ideas address different time. So many times when you'll speak about Tum'ah and Tahara, what are you going to say? You're going to say, it's not in our times. That wasn't the time of the Beit HaMikdash, when they had the halachot, the laws of Tum'ah and Tahara. Today, it does not apply. However, this is not true. Why is that not true? Because the Torah is eternal. And if the Torah is eternal, the message of the Torah, every word of the Torah is eternal, is relevant. The question is, how do you make this Tum'ah and Tahara concept relevant to our days? How does it apply today? Today, by the way, we are all Tme'emetim. All of us are Tameh. Why are we Tameh? Because we were exposed one way or another to dead bodies. By being exposed to dead bodies, you automatically become tameh, impure. Again, impure is not the right word, but just for us to understand. Right? And as we're going to see, being in the status of Tum'ah, especially when it's Tum'at Met, Tum'at Met, being in contact with a body, a dead body, is the worst type of Tum'ah. There's not worse than that. This is the Avi Avot HaTum'ah. The literally means the father of fathers of all Tum'ot. The greatest Tum'ah that a person could have. And why can't we become Tahor today? Why can't we get out of this status of Tum'ah? Because of the fact that we don't have the Para Aduma, the red heifer. The red heifer was the one that rendered the people who were Tameh by sprinkling the ashes of the Para Aduma on them. They used to become Tahor. Today we do not have that. And therefore, that makes us, that renders us into Teme'e Metim, and we have this status for the rest of our lives, for all our lives. Okay. That is why, by the way, last Shabbat, when we read the parasha, we took out two Sifrei Torah. In the second Sefer Torah, we read Parashat Chukat, that speaks specifically about the red heifer. The reason that we read it at that time is simply because it is before Pesach, and when someone was tameh, he couldn't bring the korban, he couldn't offer or eat the korban Pesach. To the point that there were some people who came to Moshe Rabbeinu and they told him, "Anachnu temeim lenefesh adam. We are in a status of tum'ah. We were in contact with a dead body, and we will not be able to bring the Korban Pesach, to eat the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan, on Pesach. What should we do? Right? And Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, and God replied to him and told him, they are going to have a second chance. When is that? Pesach Sheni, a month later. Why? In order to have the status of Tahara. Okay? To bring them to the status of Tahara. And then, by that, they will be able to come and to eat, to bring the Korban Pesach. Okay? But today we don't have that. And we are all tameh. But coming back to the question, what, if any, rational explanation can be suggested for the overall existence of the halachic status of Tum'ah and Tahara? What lessons can be derived from these mystifying concepts? Okay, this is what we'll try to deal with tonight. So, there are different approaches to it. Before getting to the approaches, let's think. The idea of Tum'ah and Tahara, we find it in different contexts in the Torah. Okay? Some of them that are cited in the copies that you have. For example, you have the Tum'ah and Tahara when it comes to animals. In Parashat Shemini, that we read recently, not last week, but a couple of weeks ago, it's talking about, actually this week, last Shabbat we read it, it's talking about kosher and non-kosher animals. How does the Torah treat them? Tameh or tahor. So when it comes to animals, either the animal is tameh or the animal is tahor. It doesn't say kasher, it says tameh or tahor. Right? By Noah also, it says, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God told them to bring into the teva, into the ark, animals, how did he tell them to bring? Bring from the tameh animals and from the tahor animals. So here is one idea, one example. When God warns the Jews against following the corrupt ways of other nations, how does he tell them that? He repeatedly uses the terminology of Tum'ah and Tahara. So again, when it comes to nations, Tum'ah, Tahara. Again, another idea, Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. What does it say there? It says in the Torah, besides the fact that we have to atone for our averot, for our misdeeds, for our sins, it says, Lifnei Hashem titharu. Before Hashem you will become tahor. So again, the idea of Tum'ah and Tahara. So that makes our understanding even more difficult, because this idea of Tum'ah and Tahara is not necessarily only in the korbanot, when it comes to the korbanot, to the sacrifices, but rather we find it in different contexts in the Torah. Again, how do we understand this idea of Tum'ah and Tahara? Okay. So let's go back for a minute and speak about the Avi Avot HaTum'ah, as we spoke about before. Avi Avot HaTum'ah, the greatest Tum'ah that a person could have is being in touch with someone who's dead, a dead body. Okay? Now, being in touch with this dead body renders this person tameh. As we said, he has to go through this process of the red heifer. And if we analyze this idea of being exposed to a dead body and being in the worst status of tahara, of tum'ah, question is, why is it that way? After all, it is a great mitzvah to bury a person. For example, the Torah says, if someone is walking on his way, and he finds in the middle of nowhere a body, what is he supposed to do? There's no one to bury that body. What is he supposed to do? He is supposed to be the one who does the mitzvah of kvura, of burying. Why? It says, me'afar bata, you came from earth, ul-afar tashuv, and you have to go back to where you came from, earth. So therefore there's a great mitzvah. This person, this dead body, right, is considered a met mitzvah. And that person where there is a mitzvah for the other person who's alive to bury him. So it's a great thing. Besides that, the society that takes care of burying, how are they called? Chevra Kadisha. What is Chevra Kadisha? The holy group of people. So they are holy people. It's a great thing, to be part of the Chevra Kadisha. It's a big mitzvah to be part of that Chevra Kadisha, to take care of the body with respect and so on and so forth. So why would those people be the ones who would be treated as the people who are Teme'e Metim, Avi Avot HaTumah, in the worst case of Tum'ah ever? We have to ask ourselves a question. Because if it's such a big mitzvah, why would we treat them that way? Why would the Torah say that they are considered Teme'e Metim? Exposed to a dead body means a great big tum'ah. Okay? So, there are two possible approaches that we could suggest. On the one hand, and you can look at the approach, it's C. Number one, tum'at hamet, ritual impurity conveyed through contact with death, underscores Judaism's fundamental focus on life. As Jews, one of the most important things that we have in our life, in every day, what is it? Chaim. Life. Right? The Jewish nation is born into a world preoccupied with the mysterious reality of death. How do we see it? We were in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Plenty of death. People at that time, pagans, what was the pagan way at that time? What did they used to do? Sacrifice. Worship death. Sacrifice people, babies, children, whatever it was. So they were exposed to death. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, what does He do? He tells us that we have to focus on life. Life is the most important thing. Contrary to all these beliefs and whatever we saw in Egypt and whatever we were exposed to, Kadosh Baruch Hu, as He takes us as His nation, as His chosen nation, He makes sure that we know that life is the most important thing. And therefore, even though we have this idea, this great idea that it's important to bury and to bury properly and to be part of the Chevra Kadisha and Met Mitzvah and so on and so forth, being exposed to a dead person equals what? Impurity. Because that contradicts what Jewish belief is all about. Our Jewish belief is about life. And without life, when there is death, with death comes this idea of Tum'ah. Okay? So this is one way of understanding it. The emphasis basically is in Judaism, as Jews, is life. As the Torah says, "Hine natati lefanecha et hatov ve'et hara, ha'chayim ve'hamavet." I gave in front of you. God is talking to Am Yisrael. He's telling him, Hayim, tov, ra, good and evil, life and death. It's up to you to choose. U'ba'arta b'chayim. You should choose life. Most important thing. So this is the lesson that we have. Without that, tum'ah.
But then, when a woman gives birth, and I understand like the blood, but she's Shemai,
She's tamei, right?
Like 33
right? 33
days
or
after
6.
a boy and the 66 after a girl.
That's correct,
So she, like, it's a mitzvah of life,
right?
but is it just because of the blood, or is it because...
So we'll talk about it a little bit later. Excellent question. What about this idea of, and even today, we have this idea of a woman giving birth. It's not the same thing as the time of the Beit HaMikdash, 33 and 66. However, she is in the status of tum'ah till she goes to the mikveh and so on and so forth. So we'll see, we'll talk about it, about the idea of family purity in general. So this is one approach. The second approach is the laws of tum'ah ritualize the challenge of responsiveness to an outside world, which means even the most powerful events and circumstances in our environment easily become rote if they are repeated often enough. So if someone is exposed to death, doctors, nurses, funeral directors, soldiers, war, and so on and so forth, after a while, right? It's like you open the internet and you see news. Okay, this country, there's today there were 20, I don't know, whatever, 100 people who were killed. So what happens eventually? You become, used to it. Okay, death. Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to remember that death equals tum'ah. You cannot get used to it in any way. And how would HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, remind us that you cannot get used to it, even if you see it on a daily basis? It's something that you are used to see, that you are exposed to day in and day out. Tum'ah. You're going to be in the status of tum'ah. You'll have to go through the process in order to be mitaher yourself. Why? To realize again that life is the most important, and you cannot go into this vicious cycle, into this road of getting used to mavet, to death. Okay? Fine. Interesting approaches. However, if you look at D, clearly neither of these approaches fully explain the myriad intricate laws that fall under the Torah's rubric of Tum'ah and Tahara. Each approach, however, suggests possible lessons that can be gleaned from the central core of these mysterious mandates. Okay. But there are some points that we have to ponder about, we have to think about. So, one thing is, and you could look at approach A, while the majority of edicts falling under the rubric of Tum'ah and Tahara do not apply in the absence of the temple, one major area of law remains fully functional to this day, which is what? The mandates of Taharat HaMishpacha, family purity. Family purity is something that still applies today. Okay. How is it? What is exactly the family purity? Family purity, in brief, is the time that the woman has her period. At that time, she cannot be with her husband. She has to go through the process of tahara, which is a minimum of 12 days. And during that time, she has a certain process that she has to go through in order to get herself to the point that she goes to the mikveh, the ritual bath, and she becomes tahor, she becomes okay to be with her husband. Now, what is this idea all about? And as we said, it's applicable today. So many rabbis speak about it. By the way, for centuries, Jews kept this mitzvah. It is known that in certain countries, people used to travel even hundreds of kilometers. Women used to travel even sometimes risking their lives, going into, there were places that there were no mikvahs, mikvaot like we have today. So you used to make a hole in the cold ice and immerse there. So really, they people gave a lot of importance to this idea of taharat amishpacha. However, by the way, when it came to our modern society, many people felt wasn't a sophisticated mitzvah anymore. It's something that is archaic, and people started to leave this mitzvah. Interestingly, in the last, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years, this mitzvah has started to take important, people are giving importance to this mitzvah. Partially because many of the Jewish leaders, rabbis, and so on and so forth, explain to them the importance of this mitzvah. One idea that is many rabbis use is the idea of keeping the intimacy between husband and wife fresh. When you have this period of time where you cannot be with your wife with husband, it's a time that you have a different relationship, which is not necessarily, it's not a physical relationship, but it's a more of an emotional relationship, and it makes your marriage stronger. It's an interesting idea, it's a nice idea as well, but by the way, in no way that could save a bad marriage. If there's a bad marriage, there's a bad marriage. The only thing it could do, it could make a good marriage into a better marriage. Okay? So this is an interesting idea. Okay? However, many women don't understand this concept as well. What does it mean if you would tell a woman, you would translate tahara or tum'ah to clean and unclean, pure and impure. Woman will say, what did I do in order to deserve to be considered unclean or impure? I didn't do anything. This is part of nature. And because of part of nature, I will be considered teme'ah, impure, not clean. How does this make any sense? Okay? So, let's look at the approaches he gives us here on page 89. Number one, it says, Tum'ah is not necessarily a negative state, but rather a halachically limited state which is mandated in response to powerful stimulus. So that's one idea. The idea is that we can't look upon Tum'ah as something that is negative. It's not something that is negative, but rather it's something that is considered a halachically limited state. Number two, a woman who experiences a menstrual period is thereby neither impure nor unclean. Instead, she enters the halachically limited state of tum'ah. In her case, this state is caused by a potent, recurring event that regularly touches her life with intimations of morality. Okay? So, that's the idea. The idea is that a woman has to reason and understand that this idea has nothing to do with cleanliness or not being clean and so on and so forth, but rather it has to do with with mortality, which is the idea of blood. When she sees blood, it reminds her of mortality. Number three, each month during menstruation, a potential life passes through a woman's body. Rather than going unnoticed, this profound event should affect her life and her husband's as well. The law therefore mandates, with no judgment attached, a period of limitation of physical separation between husband and wife. Only after these days of separation have passed and the woman's experience has been properly noted and acknowledged, can full marital relations be resumed. So the idea is to acknowledge this period of time. How do we acknowledge it? We acknowledge it by having the woman and her husband, the wife and husband, separate from each other and then resume their physical relations. Number 4, another interesting point is, far from demeaning the woman's natural cycle, the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha thus underscore her miraculous nature as the potential bearer of life. Observance of these laws also sanctifies the physical union between husband and wife by reminding them of their unique role as partners with God in creation. So this is another idea of being with partners with God in creation. It's the idea also of being a bearer of life, and therefore, because of that, she has to remind herself of this idea of tum'ah and tahara. Coming back to the idea of death, there's an interesting story about a certain rabbi. First of all, about the Jews at that time. When it came to burial, at the Talmudic time, it was extremely expensive. It was an expensive event to have. To the point that many people, what did they start doing? Instead of burying their beloved ones, they used to leave them just like that, without burying them, because it was too expensive. There was a great rabbi at that time who realized that, and he wanted it to stop. Who was this rabbi? Gemara speaks about Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel noted that, the serious problem, and how did he treat it? He told his disciples that when he dies, what should they do? They should envelop him, wrap him with simple shrouds. Nothing expensive. And that's what happened. And because of this great man, this Rabban Gamliel, it became a custom that whoever dies today, a Jew dies today, how do we bury this Jew? With what? With a very cheap type of shroud. Why? Because the emphasis should not be death. And this is what Rabban Gamliel wanted to teach us. He wanted to teach us that everything, the emphasis has to be about life. And when you give too much emphasis about death, by spending too much guilt, money, this is what happens. And the Jews from that point and on took his advice. And wherever you will go today, in any country that you will go, if you will ask the Chevra Kadisha, what do they do when they prepare the person to his burial? They will tell you that they wrap him with tachrichim, which is shrouds. In the case of a man, they also add his talit, and that's the end of it. And there's no difference between someone who had $1 billion or someone who had $1. Everyone is buried the same way, because the emphasis has to be about life. And that means as well that even the coffin and so on and so forth, ideally, should be the same one. In our community in Vancouver, by the way, which is a great thing, whoever dies, they put him in the same type of coffin. Then doesn't make a difference if the guy was rich or poor. The fact is, it is the same coffin. It is the same shrouds. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Okay? Now, how is it relevant to us besides this idea of burial? It is also important to remember that sometimes what happens is, and we find it in the Jewish community, that there's a lot of money that is spent when it comes to certain events. Bar mitzvahs, weddings, and so on and so forth. And even people who don't have, what do they want to do? They want to keep the norm. And since the Cohen family across the street did a wedding for their son for $100,000, we will have to do the same. What we have to remember is that the emphasis is deeper than that. The emphasis should not be all these events that money is spent on left and right. Don't get me wrong. It's important to have a bar mitzvah. It's important. It's good. We have to get married. We have to do all these different life cycle events, obviously. But in no way doesn't mean, and this is what Rabban Gamliel taught us, that we have to, it doesn't mean that we have to spend exorbitant amount of money, even if we have it. And certainly if we do not have it, the fact is the emphasis should be on greater things, spend more time on life and the importance of life, and what do we do with life, and what do we do with our time, and so on and so forth. And that brings us back, just to conclude, to the idea of Tum'ah and Tahara. That the idea of Tum'ah and Tahara basically is that we have to realize that life is the most important factor. And since HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us life, we have to use this life intelligently, wisely, use our time wisely, not waste our time, and so on and so forth, in order to try to fulfill our potential in this world, and to get to the end of life with everything that we were supposed to do in this world.
Li 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 li